All right, so I think we might just get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's Youth AI talk. Before going into today's talk, I'll just briefly go over our last talk, some upcoming talks, and then we're proud to introduce Professor Groth. So in the last Youth AI talk on November 7th, Microsoft Technical Fellow and CTO of Azure AI, Dr. Xiaodong Huang, gave an amazing talk on Microsoft's AI journey and encouraged the audience to further explore AI. Dr. Huang shared his take on perspective intelligence, as well as what sorts of future directions Microsoft is taking with cutting edge technology, and with some wonderful demos, which are really cool to watch. And if you didn't have an opportunity to go to his talk, you can always check out the replay on our YouTube channel. On December 13th, we will host Chief AI Officer of Citadel, Dr. Li Deng. His talk will focus on speech AI and finance AI. On January 10th of next year, Professor Thomas Furness will discuss the past, present, and future of virtual reality. He is a legendary inventor and widely regarded as the grandfather of VR. Pre-registration for both of these talks is open, and you're welcome to register and join these exciting talks. You are also welcome to visit our Eventbrite links for more details. And the other program is we're also like to introduce our mentorship program. We're rolling out a peer-to-peer mentoring program this week. So if you're interested in learning AI, even if you're a beginner and don't really have these existing skills, registration starts next week. We will be providing weekly Zoom sessions where you can interact with experienced high school students and get to learn fundamental AI concepts and work on independent projects. So please sign up on our Youth AI website as a member and you'll receive details about this program. I'll now turn it over to my host, Melinda.
Hello, my name is Melinda Hsu. I'm one of the team members of Youth AI Lab and the co-host for today's event. Before introducing Dr. Groth, I'd like to briefly go over the logistics of the talk, because since we have an audience watching from our YouTube live stream as well as from Zoom, we'll be doing Q&A through a platform called Slido. So either go to the URL I'm going to paste in the chat or go to slido.org and enter event code 21993. Feel free to submit questions throughout the talk, but we'll only be answering questions in a Q&A session at the end of Dr. Groth's talk. So please be sure to stick around if you have any questions. Now let me introduce today's speaker, Dr. Olaf Groth. We are very grateful to have him here today to talk about data in the new oil in the age of AI. Dr. Groth is a global strategist focused on deep tech disruption in the global economy and necessary growth, resilience, innovation, and transformation strategies for enterprises, private equity firms, and governments. He's the founder and CEO of advisory think tank Cambrian Futures and concept development firm Cambrian Designs, member of Global Expert Network at the World Economic Forum, and professor at Hult International Business School and UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business. He's the co-author of Solomon's Code, Humanity in a World of Thinking Machines, and of the forthcoming book, The Great Remobilization, Reinventing in a Post-Pandemic World. He's also a frequent contributor to many media outlets, such as Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, and World Financial Review. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Groth.
Thank you very much, Melinda, and thank you very much, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be with you. I also want to thank my very good friend Chen-Yang Zhu, who is a frequent collaborator of mine and has introduced me fortuitously to you, Melinda, and to you, Jeffrey. It's a real privilege to be with you all here this evening as we focus on the power that comes with big data. And in fact, $3 trillion worth of the global data economy that all of us need to get ready for, both in terms of our skill development, our entrepreneurship, but also in terms of ethics and governance. With that said, allow me to share my slide deck. Bear with me for just a moment while we bring that up. It should be reasonably quick. Here we go. If I could just get a thumbs up from you, Jeffrey or Melinda, on it showing up appropriately. There we go. Okay. Can you see it? Excellent. Okay. I will be shrinking myself out of the way here and hopping around the slides here to make the content visible to you. First of all, this to me single-handedly is the essential revolution of our lifetime here, our transition from a primarily fossil fuel-based economy into an economy that is based on data. And while it might be sounding a bit trite at this point to always talk about data as the new oil, it might in fact be, the new sunlight, as it were, given how ubiquitous data is going to be. It is going to be the currency and the raw material at the same time of our modern digital era. So let me put a little bit more meat around this. If at any point there are questions, please, as you heard from our gracious hosts, don't hesitate to put them into the chat thread or into the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer them afterwards. First of all, let's make one thing very clear. Dataism, as my fellow author Yuval Harari called it, is changing our economies, not just our economies, but really, in fact, our societies. So as you can tell here, I am sort of juxtaposing Industry 4.0, or the fourth industrial revolution, as it is called, and especially is called in Europe, with Society 5.0, which is a term that hails from Japan. And if you ask me, the Japanese have it right. This is not just something that will, in fact, completely reframe our economies. It's not just pegged to industrial economic processes. That, in fact, would be vastly misleading. Dataism and the data revolution, or as we say, the cognitive revolution, if you combine data with artificial intelligence that provides for the models that make sense of data, is in fact changing our social fabric, how we not just produce and transact commercially, but rather how we live our lives, how we relate to other people, how we self-actuate, and how we develop as human beings, and in fact, how we become or not the stewards of our environment. And I want to unpack that, but not before making a very critical point here. And that is that this data is coming from somewhere. And, normally I would, as many of my esteemed colleagues do, talk about compute power. I might talk about global platforms and the massive amount of data that they are assembling. I want to give you a slightly different point of view, and that is that we are now making sensors, in fact, semiconductors in sensors about as cheaply as 1 grain of rice. These are, of course, very particular sensors. Not every sensor, not every semiconductor can be made that cheaply. But what this means really in terms of the data economy is that we can now literally create smart dust sensors that can be sprinkled all over our environment and generate this avalanche of data that will, in fact, be yielding at a very minimum here, based on on IDC and IBM and Wired data, 173 zettabytes of data annually by 2025. Today, we're at about 36 or 37 zettabytes per year. So within the next 5 years, we will literally quadruple to quintuple this amount of data. And if you ask me, this is a rather conservative assessment, because it does not take into account various developments such as brain-computer interfaces that I will be talking about that will yield massive amounts of data, and frankly also does not yet take into account a lot of the developments around autonomous vehicles and drones. But the maybe more astounding data point here is the one in red at the bottom, and that is that only 20% of this data is structured, and only 0.5% of this data, judging by today's data on today's proportions, is analyzed. So 99.95% of all data is really not labeled, not analyzed. We have not made meaning of it, as it were. That is a vast amount of data that is out there that is structured, unstructured, but creating a lot of noise, but also yielding a treasure trove of potential insights if we manage to analyze it with the help of artificial intelligence. And that's, of course, the purpose of artificial intelligence, and that is the promise of it, I should say. But I want to give you a bit of a framework as to how to look at this new cognitive era with the $3 trillion data economy. I always find it refreshing when somebody doesn't sort of just spew a whole bunch of trends at me, but rather wraps them into a framework that I can more easily understand. So in that sense, let me say that I see currently 3 shifts happening in value creation and in economic power based on this modern data economy around the world. Shift number 1 is that our economy is now migrating from things to insights, right? We're already seeing this with various big internet platforms out there, the Amazons, the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks of this world, now yielding trillions of dollars of market cap, and really developing a giant sucking sound of a draw on resources, meaning financial resources as well as talent, away from the traditional bricks and mortar economy that was used to selling things, whereas these new platforms are selling insights. And so this will, of course, only this trend will only become more pronounced as we're looking at more and more devices on the edge devices becoming smarter with the help of all of these sensors that are now available at very low cost. If you're looking at, for instance, this image right here, this is an Intel quote, an autonomous vehicle of the future will generate approximately 4,000 gigabytes of data every day, every single day. And that is just a one car, right? So the car, in effect, the automobile, as it is being made, is seeing a value migration from the hardware of the car, the rubber and the metal, as it were, to the compute platforms, the sensors, and of course the data business models that go with it, based on various sensors that will make sense of not just how the car is performing and how it's relating to its environment, but also and especially on you as the passenger inside the car. So this is not just a massive avalanche of data, but it's also a transformation of how value is created away from the mere hardware toward data and insights. That doesn't mean that the car itself is no longer valuable, that it becomes just merely a dumb shell that is replaceable. We do know that interior and exterior design matter because human beings are physical beings, and our intelligence is, of course, tied up in our physical bodies, not just in our wetware, meaning in our brains. And so, yes, it still matters, but it will matter much less than before. This means that we are looking at a massive shift then, not just of value creation from things to insights, but also a massive shift of economic and political power from the old captains of industry, or from the old commanding heights, I should say, of the economy, which is engineering, banking, energy, automotive, to the global platforms that we have all come to like and use every day. And you see the shift here from 2007, just looking at the top 8 here, versus 2017, which is where I am right now. And you see that those companies are all global digitally native organizations, with the exception of Microsoft, that was in the top 3 in 2007, was there in 2017, and it will likely be there, if not higher, in 2027, as well as my guess, given the very successful transformation we are witnessing under Satya Nadella these days. But you can easily see how this is now a massive shift away from the traditional analog economy to the data-driven economy. The second shift here is from east to west, from west to east, and that of course means Asia. It does not mean that the West is no longer relevant. In effect, we are still very much leading in the United States and in parts of Europe on breakthrough innovation in digital, but increasingly our economic weight is shifting when it comes to the digital and the data economy to Asia, as you can see from some of these graphs, whereas EMEA and the United States here on the right are declining relative to the overall global data sphere. Clearly, China and a little bit less steep Asia Pacific are clearly taking over here, taking the lead. And our prognostication at Cambrian is that the United States and Europe have maybe another 5 years, at the very most 7 years, until certainly China is going to be co-leading when it comes to the global data economy, given the massive amounts of obviously citizens, 1.4 billion, and the pervasiveness of consumer internet, especially mobile in China. This is also evidenced by this picture. This shows the largest global data-driven giants, tech giants, in 2018. And of course, you can see here that the ones in purple are the U.S. players. The ones in sort of a pinkish red are Asian companies, and then there is Europe in green. And it's very clear that relative to the purple, the red ones will keep growing, pending the internationalization, of course, of Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, ByteDance, etc. We're going to have to observe that closely, but given Chinese ingenuity over the past 40 years and its unprecedented ability to lift 400 million people out of poverty with a very tech-forward, techno-Confucianism, as I call it, I have no doubt that that will happen. Shift number 3 then is a shift going from surveying, meaning surveying you and understanding you through dialogue, through surveys, as it were, that were still reasonably manual, to surveilling, from surveying to surveilling. Surveilling is an involuntary observation, and that is, in effect, very much at the foundation of our global data economy today. And I will give you an example of where it's going. If you look at this arguably rather technical or technocratic slide from the Fourth Industrial Revolution, this is a manufacturing run, and just bear with me and just focus on the top blue box. In the box is a widget, I believe, as we're seeing here on the left. It's supposed to be a car being manufactured by robots. Let's just make it more accessible, and let's just say that's a lamp, right? Like the lamp that any of you might have above you right now, given that it's dark out east and west here in the United States. You might have lamps, lights illuminated right in front of or above you, and this lamp, this light has to be made somewhere. So it's in a factory, it is sensor enabled, and the blue box around it is what's called a semantic space. It's a software description of what the lamp consists of. Things like, what are the materials, who are the suppliers, what's the cost structure of the lamp, when did it get produced, by when does it have to be sold, how does it get upgraded or replaced, how bright is it going to shine, who do you call when you need to talk about maintenance or sale. All of these are, of course, phenomenally important to the manufacturers of the lamp. So we want this for efficiency's sake. But beyond that, we are now seeing this lamp becoming, in fact, sensor-enabled, and not just talking about itself, but talking about its context. And that means all of you who currently have that lamp overhead will now be observed by the lamp. The lamp will be able to ascertain and then pipe back to a server on the back end whether you are currently paying attention to this talk, or whether you are busy talking to somebody else, whether you are tired or whether you are energetic. The lamp might, in fact, ascertain whether you are in the room alone or with somebody else. How many times a day is somebody else in the room? How does the room get utilized? Where do you go when you leave the room? Because there's another sensor-enabled lamp outside. And in fact, there may be one soon outside your home, and then that will ascertain whether you get into your car or an Uber or whether you bike or walk. And of course, all of these things are tremendously promising to the people that manage our building utilization, our infrastructure utilization, our security, our safety. But you can also see how you are now becoming part of the product because of the data that is delivered on you. There's now a wealth of data on who you are, how you behave, and how you perform, how you interact, that is immensely valuable for companies that want to sell you things, right, to make your life richer. So you are in effect becoming more valuable to the lamp maker in terms of the value being created through the lamp than the hardware of the lamp itself, right? And that is a major shift in how we conduct and run our society. We are in effect creating the digital nervous system of society, and we are a major component of that digital nervous system. It is no longer about things, but insights about you, going from surveying to surveilling. This actually includes also things like interviewing for jobs. Some of you may already be doing that for internships or for your post-high school job, or maybe you're doing it for college somewhere. And don't be surprised when the recruiter tells you that your interview is being recorded and that video stream is being analyzed by an artificial intelligence algorithm or algorithms that ascertain the same thing. How awake are you? How switched on are you by the dialogue? How truthful are you about what you're saying? How much confidence are you projecting about your skills and your capabilities? And of course, all of this comes out of psychotherapy and psychotherapy bots that are being developed out there and that are now being used in the economy to make sure that we can place you into the best possible job for you, for the company, for the customer, because your video feed will now be analyzed against other people interviewing for the same job. And then that pool is being analyzed against other people inside a company that are already doing that job well. And thereby we ensure that everybody wins, or at least that's the intention. But of course, we're also seeing right now, to talk about responsibility and ethics, that some of that is encountering some backlash, and rightly so, and that in effect, you may want to have something to say about how this is all going to be shaped out and made transparent. It is only going to get more invasive, and in many good ways, and in some potentially bad ways. We are now seeing brain-computer interfaces being released out there. I don't know if you have seen the announcements, very, very impressive, by our friends at Kernel, or by Elon Musk at Neuralink, both invasive and non-invasive techniques to really understand what's happening in our brains, which areas are lighting up in which ways, which areas are talking to which other areas. And that is tremendously helpful in helping us find cures for things like memory loss and Alzheimer's, even blindness, and sometimes many other alcoholism, for instance, treating the brain in new and novel ways, giving us new capabilities, increasingly also motor function, right? So imagine people coming out of car accidents or soldiers being injured in war, no longer being able to move their arms or legs. We can now recreate much of this by going into the brain, understanding it better, and going into the brain to make it function better. So that's the positive side. But of course, you could also see how it's going to be really tricky when we are starting to get stuff out of the brain that is deeply personal. And even putting stuff back in the brain is also tricky because the brain doesn't function like an iPhone, right? We don't really know how to reboot the brain or how to update the brain when there are bugs and errors. And so many people are scared of this, and I think to some degree with some justification. There is tremendous promise. I believe that the Brain Project under the Obama administration has kicked off a phenomenal area of scientific breakthrough and insight and innovation, but we must steer and govern it as well. Imagine what can happen when we are combining the 100 billion neurons that you have in your head. Imagine 100 billion neurons. I believe that's about a quarter of the size of the volume of planets and stars in the universe, right? So it's a tremendously complex and beautiful organism, or organ, I should say, our brain, and we understand barely the interaction of about 1,000 or at most a few thousand of these neurons. Now, if you can understand these 100 billion neurons and how they're firing at each other, and we can model all that through the application of AI and maybe quantum computing, and harness all that data and generate insight out of it, how unbelievably wonderful of an era might that be? And of course, at the same time, now we will then also enable the brain, the 100 billion neurons, to start communicating with what is going to amount to 340 trillion IP addresses out there, because that's the capacity of our current IP address naming convention. That's the capacity that we're seeking to build out if it's left up to the innovators in the Bay Area and Beijing and Berlin, as it were. That's where we are going. So what happens when the 100 billion neurons in your brain start communicating with the 340 trillion IP addresses? Well, somebody better have a plan about this, right? We can leave it to the BCI, BMI companies, but I think we want to have a say in how that interface works to shape this revolution in constructive ways, bring out the good and mitigate the bad. At the end of the day, what is it all about? It is about finding cognitive gold. Cognitive gold means I'm trying to figure out how somebody is making decisions, how they are interacting, how does our intelligence work? It's about finding the needle in the haystack that is this 100 billion neurons, right? And at the same time, of course, and equally promising, we are not just finding needles in the haystack this way, but we are reorganizing and restructuring the entire haystack so you can actually understand how it all works and not just find that one nugget. That is, of course, the holy grail of modern data science. That's what this is all about, the $3 trillion economy. And this is only the beginning. There is, many trillions of dollars to be made from just cleaning up current data, making it clean and unbiased and structured and labeled. And then there is that whole second phase of another $3 trillion of insights that we can gain on our environment. How does nature function? How do we interact better? How can we optimize our relationship with nature? How does the brain work? How can we harness much more potential that's in the brain? That's easily another $3 trillion. So we are looking at a fantastic potential here for the cognitive era, for the cognitive economy, right? So that said, then there are also some pitfalls that we have to take account of if we want to harness this potential. I am an entrepreneur, I'm a business person. Yes, I'm a professor and I care about responsibility and ethics, but at the end of the day, I do believe that new solutions that make humankind lead better, richer lives come from entrepreneurship and, of course, from good collaboration with government to secure that entrepreneurship. And what does that mean? Well, we are now experiencing new types of frankly, misuse and abuse around the economy of that data that we are starting to generate. We are in this Wild West period right now that, of course, you could argue is necessary to get us off the starting block, but it's also yielding some very significant infractions on security and on privacy, right? So we are now transitioning from an era of hacking behind firewalls to essentially triangulating who we are through that surveillance without really having to get behind the firewall. We're still going to deal with a lot of cyber security threats that are traditional, but increasingly there are big data companies, data brokers that are triangulating us as we roam the web. They can, for one, they can fingerprint us by our screen size, by the fonts that we use on our laptops, by the OS that we use, even our privacy settings, right? If you have set your browser to please don't track me, that's becoming a parameter by which you then get classified and characterized, right? And we are now triangulating your movement around the web, right? Not only does your iPhone collect 5,000 data points on you overnight, every single night, but also during the day as you roam the web, you are now being tracked by trackers that belong to some data broker or some ad network that will try to understand how you roam through your day, so as to profile you, right? So this was done by the New York Times. It was a digital forensics effort, well publicized. You can find it online. All the blue dots are trackers. All the red dots are special trackers that appear on multiple websites, and they can tell you how you are roaming from one website to another and what that says about you. And then they sell that insight to other companies that have other data on you, and they are meshing that data to figure out who you are, so we can sell you more and we can persuade you and get you to vote one way or another. Clearly treacherous. And in fact, treacherous also not just for the individual, but for corporations. Imagine here an average enterprise that you might work for, right? You might be Anne, the patent analyst who is going on Google patents to find certain data that the US Patent Office doesn't offer, and that search will get tracked and analyzed. Imagine Jim, the software engineer, going to stackoverflow.com for coding questions or to go on a job hunt. That is being analyzed and tracked. And now imagine Peter, the marketing director, having to prepare a press release the next day for the next week for his CEO. And that is being analyzed as he's roaming the web, as we just saw from the New York Times example. Imagine now a data broker company with trackers out there that can put Anne's activity together with Jim's activity, together with Peter's activity, and try to make sense of what is happening at the company of your employment. We can now start to make sense of these data points and triangulate impending decisions and strategies at various enterprises. That is the next evolution of cybersecurity and, of course, of privacy. So the damage being done is corporate intelligence leaks, employee safety and digital wellness, the trust and intimacy that you lose in your customers, and of course, compliance. And there is big risk there, GDPR, CCPA, etc., all these regulations that penalize and fine you if you are known to be not compliant with privacy and security laws. And so there's lots and lots of damage to be done that's very tangible for consumers and for enterprises alike. Now, you might argue, why don't we all just pay more attention to these privacy, data privacy and security user agreements? And of course, we all know the answer to that. A lot of them seem to be written in a way that they're not readable. And in fact, if you just read all of the user agreements on your iPhone for all the apps on your iPhone, you would be reading for 34 days. And so nobody reads them, everybody clicks through them. And really, you know, I can only speculate that that is part of the intention. Clearly, that is not the right solution. There are other tools out there like ad blockers, identity managers. There are certain niche social networks. There are safeguards offered by digital service providers and platforms. There are cybersecurity firms. There is VPNs. But the problem is that all of these inhibit how you can roam the internet. So you are giving up freedom to roam in exchange for getting more privacy. You could argue, well, that isn't that the natural course of things. We believe that it shouldn't have to be, and 76% of US citizens or internet users, I should say, agree. They are increasingly concerned. Many of them would like to do more about this data privacy issue, but they're afraid of losing services. They're not that technical. You all might be digitally native, but many people out there are not. And they're scared that if they push the wrong button, all of a sudden they can no longer get search results. Why should we have to see the world through such black and white lenses, right? And we believe that there is a very significant entrepreneurial opportunity for you all to jump in and secure and safeguard the emergence of this $3 to $6 trillion data economy. So there is a vast market in the United States and Europe alone, let alone in Asia and other parts of the world. I'm not going to take you through the entire pyramid, but we have estimated that there is a market for new and novel cyber security and privacy solutions that protect beyond the firewall of something like $200 to $300 million near term. The problem, of course, is that nobody can agree how much your data is worth. Some companies are saying it's really worth a fraction of a penny, depending, of course, on what the data point is in question. Some people are saying, no, it's more like $36. That's a huge difference. Some of our friends at Microsoft, like Jaron Lanier and Glenn Weil, have said, well, the average family a number of years down the road might be making $20,000 a year in selling their data. We don't really know what the real numbers are. And that, my friends, is exactly the problem. We have to get smarter on that because otherwise we leave it to the data brokers, and that industry makes $200 billion a year. And that doesn't even include Googles and Facebooks of this world, right? So why would we want to do this? I believe that we shouldn't, and that we should take the data market back, that we should design a transparent mechanism in which all of these companies can participate, but you could as well, and your future employers could as well. Personal data is valuable. We've written this up in Wired magazine. You can access it freely online. And we believe that individuals as well as enterprises ought to have a seat at this table that we describe as the privacy assured data market of the future. This is how we envision it working. I'm happy to talk about this further in Q&A. I don't want to step through this here in greater detail, but the key element is that we have to make data scarce. We have to understand that your data footprint should have scarcity in it, meaning that you determine how you ring fence the data, how you watermark it, how you license the data, so that you can then sell the data. And of course, you know, your data packages might deteriorate in value the longer you go without selling it, and different combinations of data will have different value as well. It's a wickedly complex problem. I will readily admit that, but I will tell you, we have cracked many more difficult problems in the past, and we'll crack this one as well. If only 1% of all skilled data scientists and computer scientists and AI scholars were to devote themselves alongside economists to this challenge, we could create a data market that functions not too dissimilarly to our equity markets, to our stock markets, where data is increasingly available and made transparent and accessible. So without scarcity, no valuation. Without valuation, no pricing. Clearly, that chain needs to be closed. The approach then is to create transparency about who is tracking you, why they're tracking you, whether this is agreeable with your personal or enterprise data privacy charter. And if it's not, then the data is ring-fenced, it is watermarked, it is licensed, and you can decide whether to make that a free license, giving it away because you're enjoying a website's content, or whether you think you should be cut into its value creation because your data is leaving that website and being sold to third and fourth party trying to make sense of you. It should only be fair that you get a say in how that happens. If we get that right, there is tremendous value to be created. And in fact, we believe that COVID-19 will drive us further into a privacy assured data paradigm because our health information is very sensitive. We have to share it. We have that responsibility to share it in aggregated, privacy assured ways because society needs to overall be healthier, right? We have to hold together as communities. But at the same time, we want this to be respectful to us. So if we get this right, then we can, through privacy assurance, establish trust, encourage more participation on the people that are currently scared to participate, allow for more monitoring and faster reactions of pandemics and various other health conditions and epidemics spreading, and create a safe path to reopening our economy. But all of this requires the kind of privacy mechanism that I just introduced to you, and it requires a transparent market in which you can participate. Increasingly, this is being recognized by companies, and this is just a handful of some that are seeing this as a differentiator. Deutsche Telekom, Sonic, Salesforce are clearly saying we care about your privacy. I don't even need to mention Apple. Apple, of course, being at the forefront of this. Microsoft being very much concerned with privacy and security. And so increasingly, this could become a brand differentiator on how companies compete out there. So we think the time is right for these kinds of assurances and open, transparent, privacy assured data trading mechanisms. So remember now, as I close, we are seeing three shifts: from things to insights, from west to east, from surveying to surveillance. And the answer here is, my friends, that we need to harness the $6 trillion data economy by way of instituting privacy assured data trading mechanisms. And then the world is our oyster. There is so much good to be done. Let's get to it, but let's be ethical and responsible about it. There is really no reason for why we can't. At no point in history have we ever said we are not going to create a safer toaster because it's going to sell fewer toasters. Having seatbelts in our cars has not stopped us from selling cars. So why are we thinking that privacy assurance will have us be less successful with our global data economy? I think that is a non sequitur, and I'm calling on everybody, including you, to devote your attention to this because there is so much to be gained. Thanks, everybody, and I'm open for Q&A.
Thank you again to Dr. Groth for giving such a wonderful, thought-provoking talk. As a reminder, if you would like to submit any questions, please use the Slido link provided below in the chat. I'm going to resend it again just in case some people joined a little late. Cool. Okay. I actually have one question of my own. The $3 trillion data market sounds massive, exciting, as well as extremely complex. What technologies can be used to tame the complexity to make it solvable? And if so, can you name a few?
Yeah, so I mean, look, obviously this is very much driven not just by data, but by artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms that will help us make sense of the data and gain insights from the data, because that's where the value is. Data itself is not valuable unless you can distill meaning and insights and wisdom from it. But the other area is that we need auction mechanisms to help us figure out how to even set baseline prices. We have to close the gap between the 0.0005 cent per data point and the $36 that we saw earlier in the slide. Excuse me, and that is very hard to do for people when there isn't sort of a direct sort of competition for certain data points. And so we are saying the first instance of this data market needs to in fact be an auction of certain data types and certain data packages to start closing this gap. And then as we get more data points on the true value, then we can open it up to a broader set of constituents for broader market participation.
Now I'm going to hand it over to Jeffrey.
All right, so I see there's someone in the audience just asked the question over Slido. So they're asking, what do you think is a good trade-off between quality of service and privacy? And I guess on a more personal note, I'm just going to add on to that and say, is there really what sorts of metrics should be used to quantify what is a good trade-off, or if there is even a way to do so?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeffrey, and the person who's asking the question. And by the way, let me also add one more thing on Melinda's question. Melinda, obviously blockchain is going to weigh in heavily here, right? Because as we ring fence the data, as we put watermarks on it, digital watermarks, and as we license it, we got to log it that we left the footprint, and then enable smart contracts. So that's the other area that I meant to mention. So back to this particular question on the trade-off. Look, here's the thing. So the inconvenient truth of the modern data economy is that there is no objective standard of privacy. There just isn't. There are 7 billion people on this earth, and there are probably at least as many conceptions of privacy. I think there are some lowest common denominators that we're seeing through things like CCPA and GDPR that are slowly bubbling up through tedious consensus building that takes a lot of time. But the truth of the matter is that everybody has a different type of sensibility. In fact, my co-author, Mark Nitzberg, who wrote the book with me, Solomon's Code, that you mentioned earlier, right? He is a very, very private person and is not active on social media at all. Whereas I am, even though we're reasonably close in age, I am fairly active on social media, and I'm fairly digital, and I'm more liberal with my data footprint. And so, there's of course myriad of examples of this out there. And we believe that therefore we have to have an individual privacy charter in which we can help you through smart bots, through semi-autonomous agents, figure out what is your privacy sensibility, right? And you will have your own privacy charter. After a while, we might see certain archetypes of privacy charters bubble up from that data set. And of course, we need an enterprise privacy charter because your employer will have something to say about how you spread your employer's data around as you leave the firewall. And your personal privacy charter needs to be nestled in the enterprise privacy charter, so that there are no violations of one in the other. But all that goes to say is we're going to have to figure out what people actually mean when they say privacy. So as much as I would love to give the person who asked this great question one clear definition, one sort of a set of metrics, the reality is it is a very individualized problem. One of the VCs said to me, yes, really, privacy is not a generalizable problem, and therefore there is not a general purpose solution for it. And I thought that was very concisely put, and that is why we invented this privacy charter that you can sign on to. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that great response. I think the next question that I see in Slido is just what new laws do you think will need to be passed?
Yeah, so I think the California CCPA is a very good start. I am not currently a big fan of data dividends that feel like taxes on large internet platforms. I believe that we need to get down to the individual. There should be a direct relationship between the digital service provider and the individual, rather than having to flow additional taxation through the government and then redistribute that money to the individual, because it is such an individual phenomenon, privacy that is. And so I think we need laws that enable a digital marketplace, a data marketplace, that create a institutional framework, just like we have laws and regulations for our for Wall Street, for our various markets of equity and currencies and and debt and commodities. We need to have a transparent data market, and for that we need new laws and regulations. That to me is the biggest one. Number two, I do believe that we need to engage with Europe and with China on what privacy means across borders. All three regions have disparate definitions of of what that means. Even the word ethics will be interpreted in very different ways in all of these areas. And so we need to start the negotiation between those three in order to figure out how do we deal with this as we secure the three largest market in this world for data. Yeah, those would be my top suggestions.
Yeah, definitely. Another question on Slido that I see is, in this trillion-dollar data business, big companies may become more dominant as they have more access to massive fields of data that other players don't. How do we level that field?
Yeah, so this is another great question. You have a great audience here, and they're right on the cutting edge, right? So this question is being asked a lot out there now. Do we break up the global platforms? Do we just regulate them in terms of, for instance, determining that they're really media companies rather than tech companies? That will lead to some increased safeguards for the ethos of being, a platform company, and also for privacy. Or do we just want to regulate through some kind of antitrust measure? How much these companies can acquire smaller players. We are in fact seeing not just increased power in the platforms due to the pandemic, because we're all online a whole lot more and depending pretty squarely on digital means. We are also seeing that we are drifting toward greater market concentration, meaning potentially oligopolistic structures, and that really the only way these days to get a good exit as a data entrepreneur is to go through these big companies. So it's actually, in terms of the competitiveness, the degree of competition in certain spaces that these platforms act in, we're seeing declining energy of competitiveness. And many people are alleging we're also seeing a squishing of innovation, because the only way to exit is through these big platforms that will then decide whether your innovation can make it to market inside this larger, organism that's a global internet company, rather than letting the consumers decide, right? It is virtually impossible for a small digital or data entrepreneur to stand up to these big giants. And so, do I know which way it's going to go? No. The maybe least controversial is some regulation of M&A activity. Maybe we'll see some of that in the Biden administration. I think a major breakup of these platforms, very unlikely at the moment. I don't think China is going to do it, and I don't think in the United States we're ready yet either, because we first need to beat the pandemic, and we also need to make sure that we have some engine in the economy. And if we now start to take apart the engine that is clearly there, which is these global platform companies, then what's left? So in our latest piece that we just wrote, you can find it on the California Management Review website. They have a section that's called Insights. We are saying, because we're seeing a hollowing out of the traditional economy, we now need to put more energy into digitizing the non-digital players and bring them into this platform economy. So to me, that is maybe not as much of a regulatory or policy approach as it is, a digital transformation, a call for quicker digital transformation. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have my own follow-up question to that. So do you think, what issues do you think it'll pose if larger companies may not have, smaller companies may not have as much access to these playing fields as larger companies? Do you think that poses a harmful impact?
Oh, it's definitely a harmful impact. Look, we need verticalized, specialized solutions for all areas of society. If the only way to become viable as an entrepreneur and to have some kind of exit at some point is to go through, the big actors like Google and Facebook and Amazon, who then determine that some of these smaller commercial opportunities don't warrant their attention, but they rather get acquired for the IP or for the people, then we're going to lose all this very specialized and vertical innovation potential. And I think we're wasting transformational potential for society. So I do think that we need to keep a close eye on that.
Definitely. I'm going to hand it over to Jeffrey now to ask another question.
Sure.
So I guess on the topic of the post-COVID economy, I think a lot of people have commented on how COVID's really accelerated this sort of shift away from a traditional product-driven economy to this new data-driven economy. And I think something that a lot of people are naturally concerned about is just what does this mean for the job market? And a few weeks back, we actually hosted Professor Mark Esposito, who actually I believe you've worked with in the past. And so I guess could you comment a bit on the job market and your personal perspective?
More than happy to. And yes, Mark and I work together closely. He's a senior advisor at Cambrian.ai, and he's a colleague of mine. We teach together, we write together. And in fact, we are potentially going to co-author a new book called or dubbed The Great Remobilization, Reinventing the Post-Pandemic World. So it's a big think book, think Thomas Friedman or Parakana type book, in which we're describing some of these shifts, tectonic shifts that will change how our economies are working, including employment. So yes, I do believe, Jeffrey, that the platforms are leading a structural transformation of the labor market. I do believe that the 1099 or gig economy or the free agent economy is here to stay. I do believe that we need to have new types of social security, unemployment insurance regimes. I think government needs to work with the global platforms and not just impose on them past and historical models of employment insurance, but rather figure out new models, right? We need to evolve not just our economy, but also our society in line with with this gig economy or the free agent economy. So as we are seeing a shift from the traditional economy, as we saw earlier, into the digital economy, that will only become more pressing because these big digital companies are rolling over every industry, digitizing it. And that doesn't mean that the traditional industries don't have some strongholds, don't have some defensibility to engage in negotiations from a strong position. But eventually, I believe that this is the new era. You cannot run away from it. You cannot hold it up. And so if employment is migrating from some of these traditional players into more platform models, then we either need to reinvent our traditional models of employment and insurance, or we need to make sure that, or both, I guess, that we migrate some of these traditional companies into the platform era. And so I think that is definitely a big challenge for us. And I will say for the next 4 years in the United States are going to be decisive. I think next 4 to 8 years, I think the last administration has vastly underestimated this, has not done a whole lot in that area, and we need to change that very quickly.
One more question from Slido, since we're basically out of time. Do you see more globalization in this data-driven world, or do you think it will be more segmented, like English speaking, Chinese speaking, etc.?
I do see the emergence of at least 2, potentially 3 models for the global data economy. And without putting any value judgment on it, you might deem this appropriate, or you might deem this to be regrettable. But we are, of course, seeing the US model very much sort of bottom up, let 1,000 flowers bloom, let business lead, regulate once harm is done, but not before. Then you see the Chinese model, which is also very entrepreneurial, but always with the blessing of Beijing and with a very strong hammer coming down on abuses from Beijing, a much stronger hammer than what we're doing in the United States. And China does have privacy and data security regulation through the Chinese cybersecurity law, where companies are not allowed to trade data with each other. They can use data inside, very vertically integrated, of course, so it's less of an issue for them than in the United States. So there are different notions between the United States and China on how to deal with privacy, data privacy and security. And then, of course, there's Europe. And Europe has the model of very strong protection of the individual, always putting the individual first, economic second. And that's also how the GDPR has gained in stature and really has had some extraterritorial effect, because if you want to go into a 500 million citizen data market, you need to respect the GDPR. But the criticism of Europe that I would articulate is that we are, you cannot protect yourself to world leadership with a purely defensive posture. You actually need to work on standing up your own scalable companies that will promulgate a stronger protection ethos around the world. If Europe manages to do that, then we're seeing 3 models around the world. I wouldn't be surprised if Europe and China go head to head in this in Africa. The Europeans are already working with Africa for a common integrated data market, very nascent, very slow, but potentially interesting to watch. And then, of course, the United States and China will go toe to toe through the Belt and Road Initiative, and that's 50% of global GDP, about 100 countries, right? And so I think we are on this path of seeing 3 competing models, one a bit nascent, the other 2 already well on their way.
Definitely. Sadly, we're out of time here. So one last question. Any final advice for our audience on how to prepare for they're studying high school to best prepare for participating in the $3 trillion data economy?
Yeah, I will tell you, even if you are not a mathematically inclined person, take some data science courses. Don't worry about grades. Honestly, this may be difficult for you to hear right now, but 10 years on in your life, 15 years on in your life, nobody cares about grades. What they do care about is competencies, capabilities, and being able to speak the right language with the people that are designing the cognitive era, and that's engineers and scientists and data scientists. So we need to speak their language. We need to speak their language if we want to help shape the cognitive era. At the same time, I would always tell you, please, don't fall into this craze of only studying AI and data without also studying humanities. You have to understand ethics, responsibility, sociology, psychology, anthropology, because we are humans. We are creating a society, the next evolution of society, for real human beings, not just for robots and computers. So please marry data science and AI with the liberal arts, and especially ethics. Study philosophy, really understand what we are all about before you let everything else run away with you. So it's really the combination of the 2 that you should be focusing on. And if we have more young people like you who do that, the future will be bright.
Again, thank you, Dr. Groth, for taking your precious, valuable time out of your day and delivering such a thought-provoking and exciting talk. I'm going to hand it over to Jeffrey now to wrap this up. Thank you again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, again, I'd just like to thank you as well for taking the time to speak with us. I think the topic you discussed is a very pressing one in today's era, and especially during this pandemic. And just again, just a shout out to the audience. Thank you for just attending our talk. And it's really just seeing how interested these you young people are in these sorts of trends and the future that lies ahead of us. It's really what keeps us at the Youth AI Lab motivated. All right, so thank you all again, and we wish everyone a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.